Nobody had warned Elaine that dating Seo Jihan came with supplementary material. Not in a bad way. Not in a complicated way. Just in the way that certain things in life arrive with fine print you didn't read at signing because the main offer was compelling enough that you said yes before scrolling to the bottom, and then discovered at a reasonable pace over the following weeks that the fine print included one extremely opinionated mother who considered herself a co-author of the relationship, a family security detail that appeared without announcement in the vicinity of wherever Elaine happened to be, and a man who loved so quietly and so thoroughly that she kept catching herself staring at him in the middle of completely ordinary moments wondering how she'd gotten here. The security detail had been the first discovery. She'd noticed the second week. A black car that appeared near her studio building with a frequency that exceeded coincidence. Two men who materialized in the general orbit of wherever she was when Jihan wasn't with her and dematerialized when he was. She'd said nothing for 4 days, cataloging evidence with the patience of someone who believed in confirming a theory before presenting it. Then, on a Tuesday, she'd walked directly to the black car, knocked on the window, and said to the extremely startled man inside, "I know you're not from the parking authority. Tell him I said thank you, but I want an actual conversation about it." Jihan had called within 7 minutes. "You weren't supposed to notice," he said. "I notice everything. I'm a makeup artist. Noticing is my job." She was walking back to her studio, phone pressed to her ear, and she could hear in the quality of his silence that he was working out how to explain himself. "Jihan, there was a situation," he said carefully, "connected to the family's business interests. It's been managed, but for a few weeks I wanted..." He paused. "I wanted to make sure." She walked half a block in silence. "Next time," she said, "tell me first." "Yes." No argument. No negotiation. Just yes. "And Jihan, the one in the gray jacket needs better shoes for surveillance." I clocked him immediately. A pause, and then that laugh, the full one that changed his face. "I'll pass it on." "Good." She smiled at her own reflection in a shop window. "I'll see you tonight." The second discovery had been the extended family. Jihan had one sibling, a younger sister named Seo Jisoo, 28, who worked in the foundation's communications department and had her mother's eyes and approximately 3 times her mother's energy, which was saying something genuinely alarming. Jisoo had found out about Elaine through the family's internal intelligence network, which appeared to operate faster and more efficiently than most government agencies, and had appeared at the foundation offices one afternoon with the energy of someone arriving at an event they'd bought tickets to months ago. She had looked at Elaine for approximately 2 seconds and said, in English, "Oh, thank God. We needed someone like you." Elaine had looked at her. "I'm sorry. You have presence." Jisoo had gestured at her vaguely. "The last woman my brother dated for more than a month had the energy of a waiting room. Very beautiful. Zero atmospheric contribution." She dropped into a chair with the comfortable authority of someone who went wherever she wanted. "What foundation is that? Your skin is insane." "Jisoo," Jihan had said, from the doorway, with the particular tone of a sibling who had spent a lifetime managing this. "I'm complimenting her. You're cataloging her. Those are the same thing to me and you know it." Elaine had looked between them, the controlled older brother and the chaotic younger sister, and felt something warm and familiar move through her, because she understood siblings. She had 2 of her own back in New York who operated on a very similar axis of love expressed as interference. "The foundation is custom," she'd told Jisoo. "I mix it myself. I can show you the formula." Jisoo had turned to her brother with an expression that said I'm keeping her as plainly as if she'd said it out loud. Jihan had looked at Elaine with the quiet, helpless affection of a man watching 2 forces of nature identify each other. That had been the beginning of Jisoo, which meant the beginning of having someone text her at 7 a.m. with outfit opinions. Someone who appeared at her studio with snacks and unsolicited information about Jihan's past that was invariably hilarious, and someone who had very openly begun referring to her, in group family messages that Elaine was not yet in but Jisoo read aloud for her benefit, as in the older sister. Elaine had told herself that didn't do anything to her chest. She was lying. And then there was Yeonhee. Seo Yeonhee, in the weeks following the exhibition opening, had entered what Elaine could only describe as her victory lap. She had achieved the thing she had set out to achieve, and she was inhabiting the success of it with the full-bodied satisfaction of an artist reviewing their finest work. She called Elaine independently of Jihan. Not often, but regularly. About things that ranged from genuinely reasonable to absolutely not reasonable. Asking Elaine's opinion on the Foundation's next exhibition concept, because she valued her perspective. Less reasonable. Texting Elaine a photograph of Jihan at age 7 in a tiny suit at a family event with the caption, "He has always had excellent posture. I thought you should know." Not reasonable at all. The Tuesday morning she had appeared at Elaine's studio. Not called. Appeared. In person. In a beautiful camel wool coat, with a silk-wrapped box that turned out to contain a jade bracelet that had belonged to Yeonhee's own mother. Elaine had stared at it. "It's too early for this," she'd said. "It's 10:45. That's not what I meant." Yeonhee had sat down across from her with the unhurried ease of someone who had decided this was a conversation and was prepared to wait it out. "I know what you meant." Her voice was gentler than usual. "I'm not trying to rush you, or pressure you." A small pause. "I just wanted you to have it. Because when I saw you in that lobby, I thought, that woman has the kind of presence that doesn't diminish other people. She makes the room bigger." She folded her hands. "My son needs someone who makes the room bigger. He always has." Elaine looked at the bracelet for a long moment. Then she looked at Yeonhee. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you say something so genuinely lovely that I can't be even slightly annoyed at you, even though you showed up to my studio unannounced." Yeonhee smiled, slow and satisfied. "I don't know what you mean. I'm very straightforward. You are the least straightforward woman I have ever met. And yet here you are." She gestured gently at the bracelet. "Consider it. No timeline." She stood, smoothed her coat, and pressed a kiss to Elaine's cheek with the easy affection of someone who had decided this was already family and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She was at the door when Elaine said, "Yeonhee." She turned. "Thank you," Elaine said, "for the lobby." Yeonhee's smile was the most genuine thing Elaine had ever seen on a human face. "Oh, darling," she said. "That was entirely fate. I just helped it along." She left. Elaine looked at the bracelet for a long time. Then she put it on. That evening, Jihan arrived at her apartment. They had graduated to easy evenings in each other's spaces, cooking together or reading in comfortable silence or watching something neither of them paid full attention to because the conversation was better, and stopped when he saw her wrist. His eyes went to her face. "She came by the studio," Elaine said. "I didn't know she was going to do that." "I know. That's the only reason I'm not staging an intervention." She looked down at the bracelet. "It was your grandmother's." "Yes." His voice was careful, soft. She looked at him. "Jihan, what are we doing?" He crossed the room slowly, with the unhurried certainty that was so essentially him, and sat beside her on the sofa, close enough that their arms touched. He looked at the bracelet on her wrist. "I think," he said quietly, "that we're doing the thing where two people who are very good at being alone figure out that being together is better." He paused. "At least, that's what I'm doing." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Okay," she said. That he pressed his lips to the top of her head, soft and certain. Outside, Seoul glittered on, entirely unbothered. It was Jisoo who suggested Elaine come to the family holiday gathering. Yeonhee who immediately co-signed with the energy of someone who had been waiting for someone to suggest it, and Jihan who had looked at Elaine over dinner and said, simply, "You don't have to, but I'd like you to," which was, Elaine had privately acknowledged, exactly the right way to ask. She'd said yes. She had then called Priya and said, "I said yes to the family holiday thing," and Priya had screamed for a continuous 4 seconds before composing herself enough to say, "What do you wear to a billionaire mafia family holiday?" They're not. Elaine had started. "Elaine, it's the CO family. It's absolutely both of those things." She had, after considerable deliberation that she refused to call deliberation, worn a deep burgundy off-shoulder dress in heavy silk crepe. Elegant, confident, festive without being costume-y, with her locks in an elaborate updo threaded with small gold ornaments she'd woven in herself. Gold cuff, gold rings, heels in deep cognac leather. She'd done her own makeup. Skin luminous and rich, a deep cranberry lip, liner that could have cut glass. She looked, when she turned in her mirror, like exactly who she was. The CO family home was in a private enclave in Songbuk-dong. Walled, gated, and beautiful in the way that old Korean architecture was beautiful when money had taken care of it faithfully across generations. The main house was low and wide, traditional rooflines over modern interiors, and inside it smelled like pine and something slow cooking and the particular warmth of a house that was genuinely lived in. Jihan had met her at the gate and his expression when he saw her had been everything, really. The whole thing compressed into 3 seconds. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said, because she could see he was going to say something that was going to make her feel things in the driveway and she needed to maintain composure. For what was ahead? He closed his mouth. But he took her hand, which said the same thing. The extended family was large, warm, occasionally overwhelming, and fascinated by Elaine in a way that was genuinely kind rather than othering, though the questions came fast and from several directions at once. An aunt wanted to know about her Caribbean roots, which launched a 20-minute conversation about Haitian culture that Elaine enjoyed thoroughly. A cousin, approximately 14, wanted to know if she'd ever done makeup for an idol and listed 12 specific names in order of preference. An elderly uncle said something in rapid Gyeongsang dialect that Elaine's Seoul Korean didn't fully cover, and Jihan translated with a straight face. "He says you have the kind of face that makes people want to sit up straighter. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my face," Elaine said. "He also wants to know if you can fix his eyebrows. He's been asking everyone this for 3 years. I'll see what I can do." The uncle, who had been watching their exchange with the focused attention of someone following subtitles, apparently caught enough to beam at Elaine with complete delight. Yeonhee, naturally, was in her element. She moved through her own home like a conductor through an orchestra. Everything timed, everything placed, everything appearing exactly when it should. She had positioned Elaine next to Jihan at the dinner table in a way that managed to look accidental, ensured Elaine's food preferences were accommodated without making it a production, and steered conversations with the light, invisible hand of someone who had been managing social dynamics as a professional sport for decades. But it was after dinner, when the gathering had relaxed into smaller groups and softer conversations, that Yeonhee had cornered Elaine in the kitchen under the guise of helping with tea. "So," she said, filling the kettle with serene industry. "So," Elaine said, "you fit here." Elaine looked at her. "Yeonhee, I'm not doing anything. I'm making tea." The kettle went on. "I'm simply observing that you fit. The uncle loves you. Jisoo is already texting her friends about you. And my son," she arranged cups on a tray with great precision, "has smiled more tonight than he did the entire last quarter." "You track his smiles by quarter?" "I'm his mother. I track everything." She looked up. "He's happy, Elaine. Actually happy. Not performing happy, actually." She held Elaine's gaze. "You did that." Elaine looked at her teacup. "He did that," she said. "I just stopped moving away." Yeonhee smiled, slow and certain. "Yes," she said. "That's usually all it takes." From the living room, they could hear Jisoo laughing at something, the big, unguarded laugh she had, and then Jihan's lower voice, and then the uncle saying something that produced a wave of family laughter. Elaine listened to it, felt it, let herself feel it without immediately cataloging reasons to be careful. "The tea," she said. "Yes," Yeonhee agreed. "The tea." They carried it out together, and Elaine did not examine too closely how natural that felt. Later, in the car going home, Jihan drove and Elaine sat with her heels off and her feet tucked under her, and the city moving past the windows in its familiar glitter. "The uncle's eyebrows," she said. Tell him to come by the studio. I'll sort them out." Jihan was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and took her hand where it rested on the console, without looking away from the road. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight. Your family is wonderful. They liked you immediately. Your mother liked me in a lobby before she knew my name." Elaine smiled at the window. The bar was set early. He laughed, quiet, warm. "She has good instincts." "The best instincts," Elaine agreed. "Don't ever tell her I said that. She'll find out anyway." "I know, but let's not make it easy for her." He brought her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles, brief and certain and warm, eyes still on the road. Elaine watched Seoul pass and let herself be completely, quietly happy. Jihan had been planning it for 6 weeks. Elaine found this out after the fact from Jisoo, who had been physically incapable of keeping the information inside her body for more than 48 hours post-event, and had called Elaine the morning after to debrief with the energy of someone who had personally survived a great ordeal. 6 weeks, Jisoo said. He had a notebook, a physical notebook with a pen, planning, like an architect, like a person who builds things. He is a person who builds things. He was building a proposal, Uni. He researched the restaurant for 2 weeks. He talked to your assistant Jaiwon. He talked to Jaiwon? Jaiwon knew everything and said nothing, and I respect her so much for it. He asked her what made you happiest. Not what you liked. What made you happiest? Do you understand? Because I am still recovering. Elaine, sitting in her studio in the particular warm days she'd been inhabiting since the previous evening, looked at the ring on her hand. It was not what she would have predicted, which meant it was exactly right. Not the largest stone, not the flashiest setting. A deep, rich champagne diamond, almost cognac in certain lights. Set low in a band of warm gold, simple and structural and quietly extraordinary. The kind of ring that had been chosen by someone who had looked at Elaine, really looked and understood her. She had understood this immediately when he'd opened the box, and it had undone her more than the question had. The evening itself had been, by design, almost entirely without spectacle. He had taken her to a restaurant she loved. Not a new, impressive one, but the small Japanese-Korean fusion place in Mapo where they'd had their first dinner. The owner had greeted them with the particular warmth of someone who had been told in advance that tonight was important. And their corner table had a small arrangement of flowers that managed to feel romantic without feeling like a production. They'd eaten well, and talked easily the way they always did now, the comfortable, wide-ranging conversation of two people who genuinely found each other interesting. And Elaine had noticed at some point during the second course that he was slightly more focused than usual. Not nervous, exactly. Concentrated. Like a person who had made a decision and was living inside it peacefully. She had thought, something is happening tonight. She had not said this. She had, in fact, pretended not to notice because she was Elaine Beaumont and she had dignity, but she had also very quietly ensured that her lip color was intact and her locks were sitting right, because she was also a realist. When the dessert arrived, something small and perfect that she hadn't ordered, and he reached into his jacket. She had felt her whole chest go quiet. He didn't make a speech. This was the thing about Jihan. He didn't perform. He had looked at her across the table with that whole thought look, and said, I have been thinking clearly for the first time in a long time. Since you. A pause. I don't want to think clearly without you. He'd opened the box. Will you stay? Not will you marry me. Will you stay? She had looked at the ring and then at him, and the thing that happened to her face was something she would never fully be able to describe. Some combination of recognition and certainty and the particular relief of arriving somewhere you didn't know you'd been traveling toward. Yes, she'd said. Obviously yes. He'd put the ring on her finger with the quiet steadiness of someone who had pictured this moment enough times that the reality of it felt like coming home. Then he'd leaned across the small table and kissed her. Unhurried, certain, warm. And the restaurant owner had materialized from nowhere with champagne, which suggested the whole establishment had been briefed. Now, the morning after, Elaine was sitting in her studio looking at her ring and talking to Jisoo on the phone. And her phone was buzzing with a second call. She looked at the screen. Yeonhee. Jisoo. I have to go. Is it Iyama? She's been awake since 5 a.m. Goodbye, Jisoo. She switched calls. Yeonhee. Elaine. The composure was, it was there, technically, in the way a dam technically holds water. I have heard news. From whom? It was 12 hours ago. Jihan called me immediately after. As he should. A sound that was not quite a breath but was definitely emotion being managed in real time. I need you to know that I am being very calm. You sound very calm. I am extremely calm. A pause. I just need to say one thing. Go ahead. I knew. A beat. I knew in the lobby. I saw you and I knew. I want that acknowledged. Elaine laughed. Genuinely. From deep in her chest. You knew in the lobby, Yeonhee. Thank you. The dam held. Barely. I'm going to cry now and I'd prefer to do it privately, so I'll call you later. Okay. You're going to be the most beautiful bride Seoul has ever seen. Yeonhee. I already have thoughts about the flowers. Of course you do. Peonies. Non-negotiable. We can discuss the rest. Goodbye, Yeonhee. Goodbye, my future daughter. The last two words landed with the particular weight of something Yeon-hee had been waiting a long time to say. Welcome to the family. Officially. Elaine held the phone for a moment after the call ended. Looked at her ring. Felt the word family settle into her chest and stay there. The drama arrived because it always arrives, in the form of a woman named Shin Yuri. Yuri was someone from Jihan's past. Not a serious relationship, not a significant one, but the kind of person who had made a private calculation years ago that Jihan was a future worth keeping adjacent to, and had been quietly maintaining that adjacency ever since. She was elegant, strategic, and operated with the particular precision of someone who understood that timing was everything. Her timing, in this case, was a charity gala 3 weeks after the engagement, where she materialized at Jihan's elbow with the practiced ease of someone who had identified the narrow window between him greeting an associate and returning to Elaine, and had stepped into it. Elaine, returning from a conversation with one of the foundation's board members, saw her from across the room. She took in the scene. Yuri's hand briefly on Jihan's arm, his polite, closed expression, the particular body language of someone enduring rather than enjoying, and made a decision. She crossed the room. Not fast, not dramatically, with the unhurried, measured pace of a woman who had no reason to rush because the outcome was not in question. She arrived at Jihan's side and he turned to her immediately, the relief in his eyes barely visible but entirely there, and she slid her hand into his with the easy intimacy of something long established, letting her ring catch the light in a way that was not, technically, deliberate. Sorry, she said to him, warm and natural. The board member had a lot of thoughts. She glanced at Yuri with the pleasant, non-committal expression of someone who is being polite to a stranger. Hi, I'm Elaine. Yuri looked at the ring. Something moved through her expression, very fast, very controlled. But there. Shin Yuri. Congratulations. I heard the news. Thank you, Elaine said, with a warmth so genuine it was almost cruel. There was a beat of silence that contained several entire conversations. Then Yuri excused herself with perfect grace, and Elaine watched her go with a pleasant expression that didn't shift until she'd cleared the immediate vicinity. Jihan looked at her. You weren't worried, he said. It was not a question. No, she said simply. He brought her hand to his lips, looking at her over it. Good. Though, she added, if she materializes at my elbow at any point in this evening, I will find your mother, and your mother will handle it in a way that cannot be traced. Back to either of us. Jihan looked across the room to where Yeon-hee was holding court with 3 board members. Silver hair immaculate. Expression serene and watchful. She's already watching, he said. Elaine followed his gaze. Yeon-hee, from across the room, caught her eye, raised her champagne glass 1 precise centimeter. Message received. Message sent. Elaine smiled. Seo Yeon-hee had, over the course of 7 months of wedding planning, opinions. This was not surprising. What was surprising to Elaine initially before she recalibrated was that approximately 60% of Yeon-hee's opinions were excellent, and the remaining 40% were negotiable, and she accepted being negotiated with far more gracefully than Elaine had anticipated, because Yeon-hee was, above everything, a woman who respected competence. And Elaine was extraordinarily competent. They had established early, over a lunch that had been theoretically about venues but had actually been about the fundamental nature of their working relationship going forward, that Elaine was not a woman whose wedding was going to be planned by anyone other than Elaine. She'd said this with warmth and absolute clarity, and Yeon-hee had looked at her for a long moment and then said, Good. I was worried you'd let me run everything. That would have been bad for both of us. And then they'd become, in the way of 2 strong women who have successfully negotiated mutual respect, something that functioned very much like genuine collaborators. Yeon-hee got the peonies. She had been right about the peonies. Elaine got the color palette, cream and warm gold, and the deep rich burgundy she loved, threaded through flowers and fabric and detail in a way that felt like her without being a statement about itself. Jisoo got to be maid of honor, which she received with the energy of someone who had been training for this role since birth and was ready to perform at the highest level. Priya, flying in from London, got to be the second bridesmaid and best friend witness and the person who cried earliest and most thoroughly at every event in the entire wedding weekend. Jihan's best man was his closest friend from university, a quietly funny architect named Choi Dong-hyun, who had delivered a speech at the rehearsal dinner that had produced the table's first genuine cry laugh of the evening, and who Priya had described afterwards as very interesting in a tone that suggested she would be processing this observation privately. The wedding was on a Saturday in late spring. The venue was a restored traditional estate in the hills above the city, private, beautiful, and belonging to the Seo family's holdings in the way that things belonging to the Seo family tended to be, effortless and extraordinary. The ceremony would happen in the garden, where the peonies were blooming with a lavishness that Yeonhee accepted as her personal due. Elaine did her own makeup because of course she did. She had been up since 5, not from nerves but from the particular energy of a day you've been building toward, the need to move, to do, to make things exactly right. She'd sat at her mirror for 90 minutes in the morning quiet of the bridal suite and worked the way she always worked, with focus and intention and the knowledge that this face, today, was the most important face she'd ever done. She kept it true to herself. Deep, luminous skin. A liner so precise it could have been architectural. A lip in deep berry rose, romantic without being sweet. Lashes that were everything. Eyes that were simply her at her fullest. When she was done, Priya had looked at her from the sofa where she'd been watching with escalating emotional distress and said, in a very small voice, "I cannot do this. I cannot emotionally survive today. You're going to be fine. You look like you were painted. That's the goal. By someone who loved you." Elaine looked at herself in the mirror. "I painted myself," she said, but she was smiling. The dress. She had found it on her third search, not through the obvious channels, not through a designer referral, but through a tiny atelier in Paris whose work she'd admired for years. It was a strapless column in the richest ivory cream silk, fitted through the body with the clean precision of something architectural, with a dramatic open back, and a train that was long enough to make a statement and not so long that it required management. The detail work along the back was hand-embroidered in gold thread, subtle, extraordinary, visible only up close, which was the best kind of detail. She wore Yeonhee's jade bracelet. She wore her locks loose and crowned, an elaborate arrangement that Jisoo's stylist friend had spent 3 hours creating, locks pinned and woven and threaded with small gold pieces and tiny ivory blooms, the effect somewhere between bridal crown and art installation. She looked, when Priya helped her into the dress and they both turned to the full-length mirror, like the final word in a sentence that had been building for 32 years. Priya had to leave the room to compose herself. The garden was full and still and warm with late spring light when the music changed. Elaine walked without being given away. She had nobody to give her away, she had said, because she was not being given to anyone, she was arriving, which meant she walked alone, which meant every eye in the garden was on her without distraction, which meant the collective intake of breath when she appeared at the top of the aisle was the loudest quiet sound she had ever heard. She saw Jihan at the end of the aisle. She had thought, in the planning stages, that she would keep her composure completely. She was a professional. She looked at faces for a living. She would walk calmly and arrive at her future husband's side and feel things privately in the dignified way she preferred. Then she saw his face. He was not keeping his composure. He was not even attempting to keep his composure. He was looking at her with the whole thought look turned all the way up to something beyond its previous register, and his jaw was tight and his eyes were bright, and when she got close enough to see the detail of his expression clearly she understood that Seo Jihan, composed, controlled, architectural Seo Jihan was about 10 seconds from crying. She reached him. He took her hands. "Hi," he said very quietly. "Hi," she said. "You," he stopped, started again. "You look." "Don't," she said, because she could see where that sentence was going, and if he got there she was going to cry, and she had spent 90 minutes on this makeup. He closed his mouth, but his hands tightened on hers. Behind them, in the front row, Yeonhee was wearing a magnificent dusty rose gown and crying with the elegant, undeniable efficiency of someone who had earned every tear. Jisoo, beside her, was not even attempting elegance. She was weeping with the full-bodied commitment of someone who had been holding this in since the lobby story and had decided today was the day. Priya, from the bridesmaid position, met Elaine's eye and mouthed, "I told you." The ceremony was everything it was supposed to be, true and warm, and occasionally funny because the officiant, a family friend who had known Jihan since childhood, had a dry wit that produced exactly the right moments of laughter in the spaces between the wait. The vows were private, written separately, spoken to each other in the particular hush that a garden of people creates when it collectively decides to give two people a moment. Jihan went first. He said, among other things, "You make every room larger." You make every conversation worth having. You noticed everything about me, including the things I hadn't said, and you stayed anyway. I have been waiting my whole life to be known by someone like that. I'm not waiting anymore. Elaine did not cry. She held it by approximately the width of a breath. She said, when her turn came, I kept your mother's card for 6 days and moved it to every bag I owned and told myself and everyone I knew that I absolutely was not going to call her. A wave of laughter through the garden. And then I let myself, finally, stop running from something that was only ever going to be good. She looked at him. You are the best thing. I almost talked myself out of. I'm done talking myself out of you. The kiss that followed lasted long enough for Jisoo to start clapping and Priya to sob audibly, and Yeonhee to press her handkerchief to her mouth with the expression of a woman who had personally made this moment happen and was accepting the results graciously. The reception was long and joyful and included a moment where the uncle, whose eyebrows Elaine had, 2 months prior, genuinely sorted out, took to the microphone to say something in Gyeongsang dialect that Jihan translated, at the table as, he says you were the best thing to ever walk into the family, including him, and he moved here 30 years ago. Elaine had laughed until her face hurt. She danced with Jihan, who was quietly and surprisingly good, which she filed as another thing nobody had warned her about, and with Jisoo, who was not quietly good but was loudly and entertainingly committed, and briefly with Yeonhee, who danced the way she did everything, with impeccable form and evident satisfaction. At one point, near the end of the evening, Elaine found herself standing with Yeonhee at the edge of the garden, while the dancing continued behind them, both of them with glasses in hand, looking at the lights strung through the trees. Happy? Yeonhee asked. Elaine looked at her husband across the garden. She had not yet gotten used to that word, was still turning it over like something new and solid. Laughing at something Donghyun had said, jack it off by now, the ease of a man fully in a good evening. Yes, she said, simply. Yeonhee nodded, once. Good. A comfortable silence. I have been thinking, Yeonhee said, in the tone of someone who had been thinking about something since much earlier and had selected this moment deliberately. Elaine looked at her. Yeonhee. Not yet, Yeonhee said, with an innocence so performed it deserved its own category. I'm simply thinking, in general, about things, the future. No specific timeline. No specific timeline, Elaine repeated. Grandchildren are wonderful, Yeonhee said, to the middle distance. I've heard. You don't have any grandchildren. Not yet. The lightest, most civilized pause in history. But I live in hope. Elaine looked at her for a long moment. Then she shook her head, slow and helpless, and laughed. You never stop, she said. Never, Yeonhee agreed warmly and without apology. It's my best quality. 6 weeks later, Elaine sat on the bathroom floor of their apartment at 7 in the morning with a pregnancy test in her hand and stared at it for a long time. 2 lines. She sat with this information for approximately 3 minutes, in the particular quiet of a life changing in real time, and then she heard Jihan moving in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of him making coffee, the low music he always put on in the mornings, the ordinary extraordinary texture of a shared life, and she stood up. She walked out of the bathroom. He was at the counter, back to her, and he turned when he heard her, the easy smile of a morning already on his face. He saw her expression. The smile changed, not gone, just shifted, focused, the whole thought look coming fully online. She held up the test. The silence lasted 2 seconds. Then he crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and had her in his arms, and she felt him breathe. A long, full breath, the kind that carries something through, and he pressed his lips to her temple and held her there, solid and certain and completely present, which was always what he was. Hi, he said into her hair. She laughed, muffled against his chest. Hi, a baby, a baby. He pulled back enough to look at her, and his face, his extraordinary, composed, whole-thought face, was the most open she had ever seen it. No control, no architecture, just him, fully. Are you happy? He asked. She looked at him, at this man who had rearranged rooms and texted at 9:15 p.m., and held her hand in the Seoul streetlight and said, will you stay in the best restaurant in the world? Completely, she said. He kissed her, warm and long and certain. Yeonhee found out 4 days later, via a phone call from Elaine, who had decided to call her directly because she had earned it. The sound that came from the other end of the phone was not describable in conventional terms. It was dignified and then it was not. It was composed and then it absolutely wasn't. It was the sound of a woman who had stood in a lobby 18 months ago and seen something and decided to trust what she saw, arriving at the proof that she had been right. I knew, Yeonhee said, when she had reassembled herself. I want it on record. It's on record. That I knew. From the lobby. I said it then and I am saying it now. You said it then and you were right. A sound. The dignified version of a squeal. A grandmother, she said to herself as much as to Elaine. I'm going to be a grandmother. You're going to be a grandmother, Elaine confirmed. I have thoughts about nursery color palettes. Of course you do. Sage green. Non-negotiable. We can discuss the rest. Elaine closed her eyes and smiled. Goodbye, Yeonhee. Goodbye, my daughter. The word had fully settled by now, worn in and certain. Tell my son to call me. He's right here. He's been listening to this entire call. A pause. Jihan, from the sofa, winced in the way of a man who had been caught but had no regrets about why. Outside their windows, Seoul moved through its morning, bright and fast and entirely itself. And inside their apartment, the future had already begun.
So basically, in this story we learned that true love isn't about control or status, it's about respect, trust, and choosing each other every day. Even in a world of wealth, power, and family expectations, love grows strongest when two people meet as equals and embrace each other fully. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and share.